Middle East tensions rise as Trump signals possible strike on Iran. Phones buzz as a siren flashes. Middle East tensions rise as Trump signals possible strike on Iran. Comment sections detonate. Headlines collide. Mid-scroll, a mic crackles. The anchor's voice lowers. We're getting word. Split screens flood the night. Jets crouched on a runway. Oil markets blinking red. A map tunneling toward the Strait of Hormuz. This isn't just geopolitics. It's the thin line between deterrence and disaster. In one room, maps glow crimson over a table. In another, a parent tucks a child in while alerts stat. Words fly farther than missiles. Every syllable a calculation. Bravado meets the brink. The clock seems louder. The air feels thinner. Eyes dart to notifications, searching for a promise of dawn, not sirens. This is not the first time the match hovered over the fuse, but tonight, something different is in the smoke. To see the spark, we step back into the powder trail together. The powder trail before tonight's alert. The powder trail was laid across years. Deals signed, then scrapped. Sanctions tightened, then tightened again. Tankards harassed at sea. Proxies trading fire in deserts and city edges. Diplomats sprinting between capitals while cameras chased the heat. Maximum pressure versus maximum risk. The signaling ecosystem hummed loud enough to shake the windows. Late-night posts that double as policy. Podium remarks built for virality. Unnamed sources whispering to headlines. Carrier groups inching into frame. Aircraft refueled because someone, somewhere, needed a message delivered without words. One line in a briefing can move 1,000 miles of airspace. One clipped verb can jolt markets, reroute ships, and make parents stare longer at sleeping kids. This moment matters because paper becomes peril, treaties wobble, allies brace, shipping lanes constrict, and the cost of groceries and gas turns into a kitchen table referendum on power. It matters because immigrants who escaped one siren refuse to see another follow them in the feed. Because families from Tehran to Toledo deserve breath, not brinkmanship. Because community means we don't gamble with other people's dawn. And still, the choreography continues. A cryptic thread from a surrogate. A leaked readout that raises eyebrows. Watch lists refreshed. Embassies counting the hours. Their off-camera conversations will unpack. Briefings that didn't leak. Intel nuance that trims bravado into data and turns rumor into risk. The timeline, quick cuts. Withdrawal here. Retaliation there. A close call that almost lit the coast. A drone downed. A convoy shadowed. A shout across a radio that could have been a spark. Tonight feels different because the tempo shift. Taps on the glass are louder. The silence between them thinner. But behind the podium lights is a machine that feeds on escalation. Meet the villain and the mask it wears, waiting just off stage tonight. Antagonist backstory. They called it the machine long before it had a face. It moved like choreography, all timing and teeth. A velvet hand guiding a steel agenda. The architect of its rise learned early that attention is a currency and fear a multiplier. And they spent both with a polished smile and a monogrammed pen that signed statements like stage cues. On paper, unstoppable. In practice, brittle. Day. Studied cameras the way others study maps. Wardrobes were pallets. Backdrops were banners. In a lapel pin glinted like a metronome keeping time for the talking points. Allies praised the symmetry. The message discipline, the way a headline could be coaxed like a trick of light. Off stage, those same allies traded glances and muttered about overreach. About a habit of inflating threats until the balloon squealed. When critics asked about costs or consequences, laughter did the work of logic. Challengers were dismissed with a shrug and a sharper line. The rulebook they wrote for everyone else. Civility, caution. Proof was a book they never bothered. To read contradictions became the brand. Yesterday's admonitions about restraint were today's boasts about showing strength. A pledge to end open-ended conflicts lived comfortably beside a wink toward all options. Old quotes resurfaced like time travelers with receipts. The reply was always that times had changed, as if principles had expiration dates. When a mentor once cautioned, if you always play chicken, one day someone doesn't swerve. The lesson was recast as a dare. The entourage handled the optics. One carried the pen, another managed the angles. Another seeded the whisper that every escalation was simply decisive leadership. Numbers were props, nuance, a nuisance. The architect learned to turn press questions into performance art. Answer. A different question. Coin a phrase. Move to the next room before the echo settled. If a door resisted, a larger entourage arrived. If resistance persisted, they labeled it partisan theater and claimed the stage by sheer volume. Inside the machine, momentum felt like mandate. Pole bumps were treated as proof of wisdom and dissent, as a sign that the message needed more edge. The mentor's voice grew faint under applause. The map of the world shrank into arenas where owning the moment mattered more than owning outcomes. Whenever a policy frayed, the monogrammed pen appeared again, drawing a new line, writing a new exception, annotating reality to match the script. Meanwhile, the ledger of near misses grew. Close calls were repackaged as triumphs of nerve. Alec kept smiling for the cameras while sending quieter notes that read like weather reports, rising winds, lowering visibility. The machine called it noise. Those who hesitated were ushered out of frame. The tempo quickened because the tempo always rewarded the conductor who kept it fast. The spotlight warmed to a glare, and even victories began to sweat under it. Cracks whispered beneath the applause. They didn't know it yet, but the blueprint they perfected would become their undoing. And across town, a very different story was being written. Protagonist's backstory, the tradition of restraint. Restraint has stewards, not celebrities. It lives in the quiet after-action reports, in the pauses before a command is given, in the hands that fold a flag with shaking care. Our protagonist is a composite, but the focus sharpens on one. A decorated Navy veteran turned public servant, the kind who still wakes before dawn because the guild taught them that mornings can be borrowed. They learned the cost ledger early, not in spreadsheets, but in names. Friends lost to hidden explosives, to accidents that make no headlines, to the slow unraveling that follows a long war carried home. In their kitchen, maps sat beside school permission slips, deployment letters, beside grocery lists. They marked shipping lanes with a pencil, then erased a line so their child wouldn't ask why a narrow strait could widen into a funeral. Night shifts were their second language. Calls made from fluorescent corridors. Voice kept low so a spouse could pretend to sleep. Briefings where the loudest voice wasn't the wisest, where certainty was rewarded even when it was counterfeit. They watched newcomers learn the performance. Talk tough, leak a threat, let the cameras amplify it. Then they watched the same newcomers flinch when consequences arrived with weather, not applause. A diplomat once told them, peace is stitched, not declared. They saw that stitching up close fragile truces held together by translation, by patience, by small humiliations, swallowed for the sake of a larger tomorrow. They stood in rooms where rivals shared a table and a single misplaced adjective could snap the thread. That's when the veteran's doctrine hardened into something simple enough to carry. Restraint is not retreat. It's discipline. True strength holds the line, not just the microphone. Deterrence without disaster. Protect the lanes. Protect the people. Protect the future hours that belong to children who didn't vote for any of this. Never trade certainty of loss for theater of dominance. They were not naive about threats. They had watched rockets arc, watched misread intentions turn a patroic into a panic. But they also knew that escalation is a habit, and habits become prisons. Every strike promises closure. Every strike rents tomorrow at a higher rate. Lives, treasure, credibility paid out in installments, with interest. When the machine began, to purr louder, they didn't answer with slogans. They gathered receipts, timelines, transcripts, casualty reports, diplomatic cables, and the small, brutal math of what a limited action actually means. They rehearsed for open debate the way they once checked a seal on a hatch. Because a single mistake can flood everything, they remembered the faces behind every option. Sailors on watch, translators on fragile visas, shopkeepers whose storefronts become front lines, and the neighbors who will be blamed when tempers spike. In hearings, they spoke in calm. Verbs measure, verify, descalate and tilk. Even opponents leaned in, startled by steadiness, not to win, but to save it. So when the sirens of spectacle wailed, they didn't flinch. They opened the folder. Back to the room where words turned to tremors. The studio lights bleach every face into certainty. On the split screen, the hawkish surrogate smiles, like the outcome is already decided, talking about credibility and red lines, as if the region is a whiteboard and lives are a erasable marker. The crowd gives him applause on cue. Toughness, packaged, resolve, The hero doesn't interrupt. They let the cadence run out. Then, softly, credibility isn't a volume setting. The surrogate jab signal toughness. We can't let Tehran think we're weak. The hero nods once, the kind of nod that says, I've been on the receiving end of slogans. The surrogate overreaches, hinting at strikes, limited options, surgical responses. The camera catches the gleam. Finally, the word everyone came for. And then the hero asks, plainly, the question that turns theater into gravity. What is the mission after the missile? A beat. The surrogate pivots to patriotism, to deterrence, to sending a message. The hero doesn't chase a pivot. They open a legal pad, as if they're back in a briefing room where talking is expensive. Legal authority, they say. Strategic objective. A pause that feels longer than it is. Exit plan. The surrogate tries to laugh it off with telegraph strategy. But the hero's silence becomes its own cross-examinator. The unanswered hangs in the air like smoke that won't clear. In the front row, applause falters into sharpened silence, the kind that means the room is thinking despite itself. A hot mic catches a producer whispering, "Not meant for broadcast. This could get real." The surrogate stumbles when pressed. For specifics, targets, a generality, time horizon, a shrug dressed as confidence, regional blowback, a dodge. Every answer loops back to branding, strength, backbone, resolve. The hero keeps the tempo slow, forcing each claim to stand alone. Stripped of music, then a prop appears, not dramatic, just decisive. A folder slides across the table, thick enough to look heavy, even from a distance. No flourish, just paper. The hero's finger taps the cover once. These are the logistics you don't get on a Chiron. They say, the second-order effects. Another pause. The third. The camera tightens. The audience divides, some leaning forward, some folding arms, some suddenly quiet, like they've realized they're not watching a debate, but a prelude inside, where the numbers, the slogans, never show. Receipts don't shout, they expose. The pen stops tapping. For the first time tonight, the moderator leans in instead of looking at the clock. Studio noise collapses into a single heartbeat in everyone's ears at once, and the hero opens the folder like a hatch to the real world. Reveals signaling without strategy. This is what happens when we confuse messaging for planning. They say, sliding a one-page wargame excerpt toward the camera. Arrows jump across a map of the Gulf, a spark near a tanker lane, then ripples to embassies, bases, and choke points where insurance rates rise faster than speeches. Signaling, without definition, invites miscalculation. They add, deterrence without definition is just drift with fireworks. Rebuttal receipts for the rhetoric. They don't argue, vibe with vibe, they read dates. They quote the surrogates, old interviews, praising restraint, then the new clips, coing restraint, weakness. A second sheet lists incentives, fundraising, spikes after confrontational soundbites, cable bookings after threats, algorithmic lift for outrage. Heat gets rewarded, the hero says, clarity gets punished. The surrogate tries to interrupt. The moderator holds up a hand. Suddenly careful. Reversal, redefining strength. Then the hero runs the three tests, one by one, with the calm of someone who has watched limited become open-ended. First, the legal test. Who authorizes what statute, what oversight, what accountability when it goes wrong? Second, the strategic test. What's the objective? What's the metric that tells you you've succeeded? What's the exit that doesn't rely on hope? Third, the human test. Whose names are on the risk roster and who reads them? Aloud, they flip to cost projections. Surge deployments, munitions burn rate, base hardening, medevac capacity, shipping delays that squeeze allies and spike prices at home. Next, casualty estimates, bracketed by uncertainty, because honesty includes error bars. Then blowback pathways, militia retaliation, cyber spillover, hostage leverage, a misread radar blip that turns a warning into a funeral. This isn't fear, they say, this is the math. Your slogans skip. Another page shows the alliance board, the part no one likes to air on television. A column of partners, each with a checkbox. Access, basing, overflight, intelligence sharing, diplomatic cover. Next to each box, the conditions that keep it checked. You don't just launch, the hero says. You negotiate. You reassure. You pay. They trace the chain. A strike prompts reprisals. Reprisals force defenses. Defenses pull assets from other theaters. Gaps invite opportunists. One wargame note is underlined twice. Coalition cohesion degrades after day 10. Another is circled commercial traffic reroutes. Choke point throughput drops. The hero points to the map again, to the thin blue corridor of shipping routes. A spark here doesn't stay here, they say. It hits fuel costs, food costs, and the politics of every capital that needs imports. The surrogate tries one more appeal to pride. The hero answers with a question, quieter than the lights. Who benefits from the confusion? In the margin, a commander's note reads, escalation compresses decision time. The hero taps it once, then looks up. That's when mistakes become policy for everyone. Finally, the hero pushes the folder toward the surrogate. Not as a gotcha, but as a burden to share. A photo falls out a street, laundry on a line, a child's backpack by a door. Every surgical strike lives in a neighborhood with a family. They say, the audience doesn't clap. They breathe, they look straight into the lens. If your plan fits on a bumper sticker, it will not survive first contact with reality. The surrogate's mouth opens and closes, searching for the old applause line. But the room has changed. The moderator asks once, carefully, "Do you have an exit plan?" Silence. Not the heroic kind, the exposed kind. The hero doesn't pounce. They just let the unanswered hang, heavy enough to be felt in every living room. The difference between deterrence and escalation, they conclude, isn't courage. It's definition, limits, accountability, and the humility to admit what you don't control. They close the folder. The click sounds louder than the lights. The room froze. Online, the opposite, and the shockwaves didn't wait for sunrise. By morning, the debate wasn't a clip, it was a wildfire. Feeds refreshed faster than people could process, and every corner of the internet chose a side in under 10 seconds. One edit cut the surrogate's bravado into a hype reel. Another held on the hero's silence so long it felt like a courtroom. Meme culture crowned the line like a verdict. If your plan fits on a bumper sticker, it will not survive first contact with reality. By noon, #plan before post crossed 1 million tags. The narrative flipped in real time. The old question, they strike, fell off the ticker, replaced by something sharper. What's the plan? Commentators who'd built careers on toughness suddenly found themselves forced to define it. Producers booked panels like emergency meetings. Not hawks versus doves, but authority, objectives, exits. The hero's 3 tests became a template people argued with, copied, and quietly used. Unexpected voices carried it further than any campaign could. Veterans across the spectrum posted short, unsentimental threads. Clarity isn't weakness. It's respect for those who go first. A market analyst broke down the map moment into numbers, shipping risk premiums, energy volatility, insurance cascades, the way a single choke point can tax groceries thousands of miles away. An allies diplomat weighed in with the kind of careful wording that still landed like thunder. Coordination matters. Unilateral drama has costs that don't show on television. Underneath it all, the clip replayed in living rooms and bars. Watch parties became instant folklore. The pause before the question. The folder sliding across the table. The beat of studio silence that made people lean forward like they could hear the truth better if they didn't move. They cheered not at aggression, but at discipline, at someone refusing to let war be discussed like a brand refresh. Then came the human moment that didn't trend for the right reasons, but hit harder than any hashtag. A message arrived from a family with a deployed loved one, sent late and off that it felt like confession. Thank you for saying what we feel. We're not scared of hard missions. We're scared of missions without an answer to why. The hero stared at it longer than they'd stared at any camera. A separate text slid in short, private, from someone who usually controlled doors and calendars. That folder changed the room. For a few hours, it felt like momentum had weight. Like clarity could compete with spectacle and win. But virality isn't victory unless it forces a new question at the table. Did it? The spectacle didn't disappear, it got translated. By the end of the week, the hero's 3 tests had become a public checklist, repeated in town halls, hearings, and kitchen table arguments whenever someone said the words limited strike, legal authority, strategic objective, exit plan. Not as bureaucracy, as breaks. The hero framed it in a sentence that didn't beg for applause. Power is borrowed. Consequences are permanent. Courage, they argued, isn't provocation, it's preparation. Service isn't a flag pin or a camera-ready line. It's accountability. When the easy move is escalation and the hard move is definition, a letter arrived from a viewer who didn't sound like a partisan. Just tired and awake. You gave us language to push back without tuning out. That was the point. Agency. Not to shout louder, but to ask better. To reward clarity over heat. To resist the dopamine of danger that turns real lives into content. The ethic was simple enough to remember. Heavy enough to matter. Define it. Cost it, own it, or don't do it. The room that night had frozen. The country, briefly, had listened. This wasn't an ending, it was a standard. Here's how you help enforce it.